Hello, Namaskar, welcome to my pod, the CAA Show. CAA, as all of you know, is Conversations and Analysis, and my name is Juggi Bhasin. First of all, greetings to all countrymen on our Independence Day, 15th August. It's a pious day, it's a very important day in the national calendar, and I thought it would be very appropriate that in today's pod, I would discuss the security situation in the country, especially what's going on in the Jammu sector. I think we need to discuss that and find some solutions to what is really going on in that particular sector. At least from our end, we can recommend some suggestions to the government. So what is really going on? We of course know the very sad news which happened only a day before, that one of our army captains lost his life. He was killed in a gunfight with these terrorists, these Pakistani terrorists coming from across the border in Doda. And he has not, of course, been the only casualty. There have been a number of our troops, both our jawans as well as our officers, who have been killed in that sector in the last few weeks. And some say that the number has actually gone up over 50, which is an inordinately very high number. And therefore, I am asking a few questions in this podcast, that how long can this kind of attrition go on? Can we afford to continue losing so many troops, our junior but our very brave officers in such situations? Is it also time that we rework strategies? Is it time that we rework our thinking and bring in some new additional ideas and measures to counteract with what is going on in that sector? And specifically, I mean that has the time come that we deploy air power. Air power, and when I talk of air power, I don't mean fighter jets or anything. I am specifically referring to helicopter gunships against the enemy, against these terrorists who have infiltrated into our territory, into the Jammu sector. Has the time come for that? But before I debate that, I talk about all the issues which are involved in that particular idea, I would of course urge all of you to subscribe to my channel, the CAA Show. You all know that my podcasts are different, the ideas are very different here. So be privy to my podcast, subscribe to my channel. Subscription is of course completely free. All you have to do is to press that red button on your screen, to also like my podcast. That is very encouraging. And once you have seen the video, and I'm sure you like the video, please share this video with your friends also. Now, let's of course dive back right into the issue. The question which I'm posing in this podcast is that should we use air power in today's scenario against these terrorists who have come from Pakistan? Now, all experts, all military experts, all police experts, senior people have been telling us that this batch of infiltrators who have come from across Pakistan, this is a very different batch from the earlier batches of terrorists who have been coming over all these years across the border. This batch is not only highly trained in jungle warfare, but they are equipped with the latest weaponry. Some say they even have the M4 carbines, which are very advanced automatic rifles. They have these M4 carbines, and on top of that they also have night vision devices, very advanced sophisticated night vision devices which can pick up our troops, some say from almost a mile away, from almost 500 to 600 meters away. And that is why the casualty rate among our troops is very, very high. Sometimes the firefights which are happening in this sector are not even happening in close proximity. They're probably happening from a distance, or ambushes are happening from a great distance. But because of the sophisticated weaponry, our troops are getting killed. In that sense, even though this is our territory, it is in a certain sense an unequal fight, because these terrorists have the capability to literally melt away in the jungles, in the thick foliage, in the thick forest cover in the entire sector. Please also remember, just to give you a broad idea, that this is the lower reaches of the Pir Panjal range, Doda, Kishwar, all these places, and this is thickly forested. There are also these caves in this sector where these people hide. They, in fact, it is believed that they not only store their munitions but ample quantities of food and water. Plus, they also have some bit of sympathizers, some kind of sympathy in the local population that also is adding to whatever they are doing in this particular sector. So we need to keep that in mind. So there are a lot of factors which are actually working against us, against our security forces. And therefore, I am arguing in this podcast that has the time come that we need to do something extra. We need to do something different. And by different, I mean, do we need to deploy air power to bring the situation under control, to neutralize, to eliminate these terrorists, and also, more importantly, send a message across to the other side, that is to Pakistan, that we are on top of things. Now, why air power? Let's first argue that why air power is such a sensitive issue. Why is it such a thorny issue for many people? Why is it a very controversial issue? I can tell you this thing, that in certain parts of the world, I'm sure in the US especially, if something like this would happen, they would immediately deploy air power. They would not even hesitate to think about it. But we have our certain proclivities, we have our certain sensitivities where we are very, very careful. And the simple reason being that, according to this line of thinking, that we don't deploy air power because we are deploying air power against our own citizens. Because if something is going wrong in our region, then we should be using combat techniques where we on foot, literally, we engage, but not from the air, which gives a very, very unequal advantage. That's the thinking. And a lot of people in that thinking mold also argue that we have practically never used air power even against the Maoists, which at some point in time controlled a huge amount of territory in our country. A lot of them, of course, have been neutralized today, as we know. But air power wasn't specifically used against the Maoists also. So why should it be used now? That's another kind of thinking. That's another line of thinking which exists in the public domain. But I'm going to argue in this podcast that not only do we have a precedence of using air power in our own country when the time comes, when there is no other option, I would say, but it is actually not a bad strategy at all. It is in fact a very, very effective, very efficacious strategy to be used very carefully, of course, very selectively, again I'm arguing, but it should be used, and that time, of course, is now, especially in the present circumstances where we need to use air power. So let me give you two instances from history, because that will give you a context when I'm talking about the use of air power. There were two instances in our history when air power were used to neutralize huge threats to our national security. The first time it was, the first important one which I want to talk about was in the year 1966, if I'm not mistaken. That's right, that's the year when Indira Gandhi came back to power. And I think it was on March 5th that she ordered the Indian Air Force to actually bomb a part of Aizawl, which is present-day capital of Mizoram. And why did she do that? The reason she did that was because the threat was so intense, was so huge. The insurrection leader at that time, Lal Denga, the same Lal Denga who later came over to India and then opened peace negotiations and then was accepted back in India, the same Lal Denga who at that time was in Karachi, and he declared independence of Mizoram, or what that time was called Greater Mizoram. The threat was so great, the insurrectionists were running wild all over, that Indira Gandhi gave the order for the IAF to bomb parts of Aizawl. So it's happened there in 1966, and I think that bombing took place on March 5th, if I'm not mistaken. The other time, and that is actually even more significant for us, is that we have actually deployed helicopter gunships in a terrorist operation and in the same sector, almost ditto, circumstances. That was in 2003, and that was in what is now known as Operation Sarp Vinash, Operation Sarp Vinash, or the Snake Destroyer Operation. And something to what is happening today. In that time also, huge batches of these terrorists from the Lashkar-e-Toiba and other these terrorist outfits had crossed over the Pir Panjal range, and they were very, very active in the Poonch Surankot sector. And it was becoming very, very difficult for our counter-insurgency units. The situation was very, very tense. And at that time, the order was given for the Me-35 helicopter gunships of the Indian Air Force, of the Chetak helicopters, to strap to eliminate these terrorists from those heights of the Pir Panjal heights. So it's happened in 2003, and now I'm arguing that a time has come that we have to do something very, very similar. It can be done again, it should be done again, and I'll give you my reasons for that. So if we have dealt with this part that the Indian state by and large is very reluctant, and to some extent rightly so also, of using air power in its own territory. With the Maoists, we don't, probably the reasoning there has been that at the end of the day, the Maoists are insurrectionists, they are rebels, they are even terrorists, but they're still our own citizens. So maybe that was the reasoning why we never used air power. But that reasoning is not fully correct in the present situation here, because these terrorists who are coming across from across the border certainly are not our citizens, and therefore we have every right to eliminate this threat coming from across the other side. Now, let's understand the problem. What really is the problem that is going on out there? The problem that is going on, and I want to explain this to you in very, very simple terms without throwing too much of jargon or technicalities at you. The problem that is going on in the Jammu sector right now is that it is what is called a bottoms-up approach instead of a top-down approach. Now, what do I mean by that? It means that, as I said, these terrorists have infiltrated to our side. They are hiding. They have these hideouts in these thick jungles. They are moving about freely. They are doing reconnaissance. They are staking. It's called staking their targets, and then they are going in for pinpointed eliminations. And what we are doing is we are reacting to the entire thing. See, we are certainly not on the offensive. We are not one step ahead of the game. We are actually 3 or 4 steps behind the game, because we react to what they are doing, which means we send in our units, we send in our armored vehicles, we send in our trucks, our 1-ton trucks, we send in our troops, our soldiery, our officers, and on foot they are staking out, they are trying to do reconnaissance, and they are trying to find out where these people are. And it is a very unequal situation. And also remember that we are dealing here with the heights. We are dealing with a lot of foliage, with a lot of thick jungle. This is not level playing field, literally. This is not on the plains. This is in the mountains. And therefore it becomes even more difficult to start from ground up, to go up and to find these people out and then eliminate it. And that is the reason why so many of our troops are getting killed in these encounters. And therefore, has not the time come when we turn this entire thing on its head, which means we occupy. And this is what we did in 2003, but we need to do it even more effectively now in the present situation. We occupy the ranges in the Pir Panjal range from the top. We create these landing grounds for our helicopter gunships, where our teams, where these Me-35 helicopter gunships, and you got to see an Me-35, by the way. An Me-35, and I remember my newsperson days when I used to be in the government, and I've traveled in Me-35 choppers. They are huge choppers with there can be a deployment of many troops in that chopper. Of course, they are equipped with these machine guns which are mounted on pods. there are machine guns, so you can actually strafe, bomb, you can do whatever. There are a lot of things you can do from these Me-35. These are deadly gunships. So you create these landing spots for the gunships on top of these ranges, and then you pick out, the strategy is you pick out 2 or 3 different kind of units. Now, what are the units who are very well versed in this kind of warfare, in this kind of mountain warfare, jungle warfare, especially with the terrorists who are operating in this region? And I'll tell you the topmost teams that come to my mind are SOG, Special Operation Groups. This is a hand-picked team of elite. These people are really elite in the certain sense. They really know how to get these terrorists. SOG teams. The Russian Rifles, of course. There are teams of Russian Rifles who are again skilled in this jungle warfare. Then there are these Cobra battalions, I believe, of the CRPF. These are also very well, they have huge amount of experience dealing with the Maoist insurgency. They can also be deployed. The idea is that in batches of 10, 15 troops, people, whatever, they are ferried across in these ME. At a given notice, you do your reconnaissance from the top. From the top ranges, it becomes more easier via drones, via other intelligence sources, or through your own people who have civilians who are on the ground who will report back to you through various means. And then you send in your choppers, you send in your gunships, and you literally strafe. You literally strafe means you machine gun the entire area, and then you do what is called a concept of, we already do something called search and cordon, but what you do out there is something a little more different. You do search, cordon, and then destroy. Search, cordon, destroy. That is what these gunships do. That is the modus operandi. That has to be the way to go to counteract these terrorists. Air power, helicopter gunships have to be used from that height. Then you look down upon, and therefore, please remember, in warfare, the most critical thing to remember that anybody who occupies the heights, always, it is called the commanding heights. It's a term which we use not only in the military, but it's a term we also use in the economy also. Commanding heights. Commanding heights are very, very important. Those who occupy the commanding heights always have an advantage, and therefore, if the Indian Air Force can get its assets on the commanding heights of the Pir Panjal range and look down upon these sectors which are rife with militancy, with extremism, these terrorists right now, and then you send in what I call search, cordon, destroy ops or operations, then that's the way we will be very quickly, effectively be able to eliminate these people. And it doesn't stop there. There are now these specialized units, as I said, I gave you certain names. These specialized units like the Cobra battalions, I believe, they're quite capable. They are airdropped in around these places. They have the capability to stay for days on end in the thick jungle. Their survival strengths are very, very different from normal troops, also certainly completely different from us civilians. And then they move around in the jungles, locate these terrorists, and eliminate them. So I think our policymakers really need to, because what does it entail if you are deployed air power? There will be certainly quite a degree of opposition from within the country also, I can assure you that. Knowing the way our opposition is going right now in the country, the things are going right now in the country, there will be voices of protest that how can you do this? Our own civilians can be killed in that. And yes, let me say that there is a risk factor out there, because when you are doing strafing operation, when firefights are happening, when you are machine gunning from a height, from the top, there is a possibility sometimes innocents can also be killed. It's a risk, but that I think needs to be taken given the circumstances and what is going on out there. And I think the time has come to take these measures. But before we do that, also even a more critical factor, assuming we go in for this option, the enemy first has to be defeated in the mind before we can defeat the enemy physically on the ground. So what does it mean? It means that when you deploy air power, you are sending a message to the terrorist, you are sending a message to the handlers of those terrorists that we will protect our country, we will protect our territory, we will protect our assets, we will protect our troops by whatever means possible. Because right now what has happened is that there is a perception, and that perception still hasn't gone away. I'm very sorry to say that despite all the surgical strikes we have done in the past, but that perception is that India is a soft state. That perception still hasn't really gone away. But once you deploy air power, you're sending a message that you will pull out all the stops. You will go to any extent possible to defend our territory and precious lives. You're also sending a message that the lives of our troops, the lives of our officers is not cannon fodder, but they are very precious to us and they will be avenged. And as I keep giving, these are ratios which I keep giving, podcasters like me keep giving these ratios, but if you give a ratio that you kill one of ours, we kill 10 of yours. If you follow that policy, especially with these kind of methods, then there will be some kind of new kind of thinking across the other line. I'm not saying the infiltration is going to stop. That is, of course, the raison d'etre or the reason for existence of Pakistan, that they have to keep on doing these nefarious things. They won't ever, I think, stop. But at the same time, they will be more cautious, they will be more careful, they will not in this manner, the way they are infiltrating at the moment. That, of course, certainly will probably come to a stop. So basically, you are sending both psychological, you are sending also both a physical message by deploying air power that the Indian state will take all possible options. It will not restrict itself in any way. It will not fight a war, as the common saying goes, with one hand tied behind your back. The Indian state will not do that. It will deploy every measure at its command to go after terrorists. That is a message you will be sending across. And of course, that has to be supplemented. If you go on that, and I've already argued this in earlier podcasts, you need to also start your covert actions. You need to strengthen your covert action and sometimes even direct assault, fire assaults on the enemy. What is to stop us from launching, as I said, howitzer assaults on Pakistan, the other side? We have the weaponry, we have the range, we have the capability, the gumption. Start these assaults. In fact, if even for a longer period of time, if the border is actually up in flames to that extent, nothing wrong with it. We have the money, we can, as I said, the Pakistan doesn't have the ammunition, they don't have the strength to keep up. If they fire back at us, we have, and therefore we need to supplement air deployment efforts, that is, if it ever is okayed. Along with these efforts, direct assault, sometimes send teams of people across. See, if they are sending teams across at will, we should be able to do the same thing. Why should we be hesitant? Oh, we can't cross the line of control, we can't cross the border. I think we should now leave all that thinking behind. The fact is, we have to accept the fact also in this change, in this rapidly changing geopolitical, geostrategic situation, we now have to come to face facts that we are surrounded by enemies all around us. Let's face facts. And therefore, our thinking cannot be that old, staid Indian thinking that let sleeping dogs lie, let things be like this, and maybe after some time things will cool down on their own and things will go away. They are not going to go away. The world is not only changing, I would say the world has completely changed in the last few years now. Today, people are out to get you, literally, in a larger sense, in a larger context. And in that context, you have to reappraise, you have to revisit, you have to reevaluate your policies, including your military strategies, including your counter-insurgency strategies. The same old strategy we were deploying earlier of restraint no longer works to my mind. So all that new thinking has to come back. And finally, what really is the aim of what we are trying to do? Is the aim, as some would argue in this country also, that India now aims to be a warmonger, India aims to be a militarist state? Not at all. That is not the aim at all. But you can conduct the most peaceful things in India, but only by strength of military arms, by showing to the world, by showing to your adversary that you are a strong country, and you will not only react, but you will go on the offensive like the Israelis. And I keep giving the example of the Israelis because they might do a lot of things which are not correct, but they do many more things which are correct. Let's emulate that. The way they deal with their enemy is something to be emulated. They go after you. They don't leave you till avengement literally happens. We have to adopt the same policies. And therefore, the aim of our aim really is that we have to not only be reactive, but we have to go on the offensive. Our aim is to show that we will brook no terror. Our aim is to show that if you come our side, not only we will eliminate your assets, but we will come after the handlers also. And the aim is not only this destruction, but to overall cause fear in the hearts and minds of the enemy, to create confusion in the minds of the enemy, to create unpredictability. And lastly, that's the last point which I will be making, is that let the India of old, the predictable India of old, the kind of India everybody is used to, that yes, we know how India will react, they will take a long time to do something, till that time we can inflict maximum damage as much as we want. Let that era be over, let that policy be over. Maybe the time has come when we need to be unpredictable to the enemy, and by unpredictable means that you adopt completely new ideas, completely new strategies, like as I said, the strategy, for instance, of air deployment, helicopter gunship deployment. You need to surprise the enemy, you need to stun the enemy, you need to confuse the enemy. The time really has come for that. And I'll just leave you with one very interesting example which has only recently happened. That's in the Russia-Ukraine war. Now, I still feel that Ukraine by and large has, if they haven't lost the war, then they are losing the war. But they did, by all accounts, surprise the Russians in Kursk. Of course, eventually it is not the greatest of moves which they have made, but at least for the short period of time, they've got world headlines. Their troops have moved in deep inside Russian territory. All these mobile units are going back and forth. Not that they have captured anything of significance, but the fact is the sheer unpredictability of the Ukrainian military tactics. As I said, it's a losing side at the moment. Has obviously, I would say, even the Russians will never admit to this, but it has surprised Russia. So what I'm trying to argue is, I'm not so much commenting on the Ukraine-Russia war. I'm really talking about our situation, that in this battle of attrition between the good guys and the bad guys, between the bad guys, of course, are the terrorists who are coming from the Pakistan side. We are the good guys, obviously. In this battle of attrition, surprise, unpredictability is a very key factor. And the day we learn to factor these elements inside our psyche into the way we develop our strategies, in the way we carry out our strategy, then the enemy will no longer take us for granted, which I'm sorry to say at the moment I think they are doing. We need to change this course of events, and therefore the time has come to try something different in that entire sector. And so on this note, I come to the end of this particular podcast. I hope you like this podcast. You like my show, you like my pod. The fashionable word to use is pod now. If you like my pod, do subscribe to my pod. And subscription, of course, is free. And of course, till next time, it's goodbye and cheers to everyone out there.